Currently the UK hasn't actually left the EU, they've simply declared that they're going to leave. So they can't technically rejoin the EU because they haven't left yet. But they could rescind Article 50 and just call the whole thing off. Or can they? Well, before we get into that, here's a quick reminder about Article 50. It's an article of the Lisbon Treaty which the UK invoked to start the process of leaving the EU. The article, which came into force in 2009, states that any member may decide to withdraw from the Union in accordance with its own constitutional requirements. The article also sets out a number of terms of leaving you're likely already familiar with, such as a 2-year negotiation phase. Considering the UK invoked Article 50 on the 29th of March 2017, that means that there's 18 weeks as of the recording of this video until the UK leaves the EU, and it would obviously be too late to revoke the declaration. That's if the UK is ever able to revoke it. In a 38-page document, the Policy Department for Citizens' Rights and Constitutional Affairs discussed if the UK is able to withdraw its notification, and honestly, it's not entirely clear. The article published by the European Parliament think tank and linked to below discusses various questions and challenges which exist around the topic. But as with all things Brexit, it's unknown ground. No one has tried to leave the EU before, so we can't be fully certain what will happen. Some clarity does come from Lord Kerr, one of the treaty's authors, who claims that it can be revoked by the UK, and the UK can wait as long as it wants before they revoke it. Naturally, waiting as long as the UK wants actually means as long as the UK wants, as long as it's before the 29th of March, when it's too late to revoke the declaration, as the UK's already left the EU. For the sake of this video, let's assume that Lord Kerr is right, and the UK is able to revoke Article 50. We can't be 100% sure, and if the UK tries, it could come down to a legal battle. But let's assume that the UK can choose to revoke Article 50 and remain in the EU in theory. Would that ever happen in reality? Well, one way of that happening is through a second referendum. Now I'm really on dangerous ground. Talking about a second referendum and revoking Article 50 in the same video, the comments are going to be on fire for this one. In all seriousness though, the most likely way the UK could end up staying in the EU is through a second referendum. It seems highly unlikely that any politician will be willing to take the hit of being the person who cancels Brexit. I think my comment section can get bad. Imagine how that politician would be treated. Although many MPs were anti-Brexit before the referendum, including Theresa May by the way, and it seems like most of them don't like Theresa May's deal, I still can't see them risking accusations of being undemocratic or ignoring the will of the people. So if you can't get the deal you want, and you can't decide to end the whole thing, how can MPs make this problem go away? Well, one way of getting around it is letting the people have another vote and pray to God they vote to remain this time. I'm not saying they should do this, and I'm not saying that people should vote to remain, I'm just saying that's how a cowardly MP could get around voting on it. Theresa May has unequivocally rejected the idea of a second referendum on many occasions. Jeremy Corbyn has also been reluctant to support the idea, despite 86% of Labour members being in favour of a second referendum. But if they end up being faced with the choice of no Brexit deal or a second referendum, they may change their tune. And the idea isn't wholly unpopular with the public. While the data for the last few weeks isn't available, support for a second referendum has slowly been on the rise in recent weeks with the general public, with an increasing number of people saying that the UK should be given another vote. The UK would have to be quick if they want to get a second referendum organised though. Remember that the UK only has 18 weeks left until it's set to leave. Well, the Political Parties Elections and Referendum Act of 2000 requires that there be at least 10 weeks between legislation and referendum. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of spare time. And even 10 weeks is optimistic. While 10 weeks is the legal minimum amount of time a referendum can take, recent votes have shown how easy it is to pull that off in reality. Take the original 2016 EU referendum. It took about 15 weeks of being in the House of Commons during the legislation phase, then about 10 weeks in the House of Lords, then a few weeks ping-ponging between the two houses, then close to 20 weeks passed before the regulation period began. Then finally the 10-week regulated phase started. That's almost 60 weeks between the day that legislation began and the end of the referendum. In 60 weeks the UK will be long out of the EU. Even quicker referendums like 2011's AV referendum wouldn't be fast enough, taking just over 40 weeks. And the North East England devolution referendum shows how rare a quick referendum in the UK is, taking over 100 weeks to complete. So if by some miracle May's government were able to pull it off and have a second referendum, what would happen? Well, this is a question I want to answer in more detail in a future video, but let's go over the headlines quickly now. The vote probably wouldn't be a standard first-past-the-post procedure, instead opting for an STV vote, where people are able to rank their preferences. That way, the electorate can be given 3 options: leave with no deal, leave with the government's deal, or remain. An STV vote would even avoid the pro-Brexit vote being split between the 2 leave options. While polling data is inherently limited, and projecting what people will do based on polling is often a bad idea, it's always interesting to ignore those facts and take a look anyway. People have been regularly polled to see if they think that the UK made a mistake voting to leave in the referendum. The results have been incredibly close, unsurprising when you consider that the referendum results were also very close. The people who think that the UK made a mistake are beginning to edge a lead, with more people in recent weeks saying that the UK made the wrong choice. That being said, there isn't reliable data for the last week or so, which has been full of consequential Brexit news which could have changed people's minds. As I said, we're planning a full video predicting what the result of a second referendum would be, so like this video and leave us a comment below if you'd be interested in that. Now we know that if the UK decides before the 29th of March that they want to stay in the EU, then they can, possibly, maybe, in theory, withdraw their declaration of Article 50 and try and pretend like nothing happened. They can do that by a politician withdrawing it, or if none of them are brave enough to actually do that, they can chuck it back to the people in a second referendum. But what if it's after March 2019? Can the UK choose to rejoin the EU after they've officially left? Once the UK's left, they could ask to return, but they'd have to reapply from scratch. Any nation applying for EU membership has to meet the 1993 Copenhagen criteria. This criteria includes requirements such as the nation having stable institutions to guarantee democracy and human rights, a strong market economy which can cope with the pressures of union membership, and the ability to take on the obligations which come with EU membership. Considering the UK has been a member of the EU for years, it won't come as much of a surprise that meeting these criteria shouldn't be too hard for the UK. The thing that could be more complicated is replicating the deal that the UK already has. Contrary to popular opinion, the UK actually has quite a custom deal, with 4 opt-outs, more than any other EU nation. Being able to negotiate all 4 of these opt-outs again would be near impossible, especially considering the political bad blood which now exists between the UK and EU. The first opt-out that the UK has is that they're not a member of the Schengen area. The Schengen area is made up of 26 countries who have abolished all border controls at their common borders. Currently the UK is not a member, nor is Ireland, and as they're both island nations away from continental Europe, it does make some sense that the UK is fairly likely to be able to renegotiate this. The second opt-out is over the Economic and Monetary Union. 9 EU countries don't use the euro. However, currently the UK and Denmark are the only 2 to officially be opted out of adopting it. The other countries, Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania and Sweden, don't have the euro, but that's because they don't meet the requirements of its use, often due to some of them being newer EU nations. This means that countries are able to resist the euro indefinitely by not meeting its criteria, such as joining the European exchange rate mechanism. It's possible the UK will be able to negotiate not taking the euro for a second time, or at least putting it off indefinitely, but it could be pretty politically difficult. The EU might not be keen to let the UK back in if they don't also accept the euro. The third opt-out is not a full opt-out, but a clarification which limits the way that the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, part of the Treaty of Lisbon, can interact with UK law. In effect, it limits the power that European courts have when employing the Charter in the UK. The fourth opt-out is a flexible opt-out on area of freedom, security and justice legislation. Ireland has a similar flexible opt-out to the UK, and Denmark has a more rigid opt-out. But like the others, re-securing this opt-out could be hard. If the UK leaves on the 29th of March 2019, getting back in wouldn't be a simple task. While it would be easy to pass the Copenhagen criteria, getting the deal which the UK will be happy with would be somewhat harder. Even negotiating the same opt-outs that the UK currently has would be difficult, and if the UK is coming back to the EU, they likely would want a better deal than the one they already have. So you're not really just talking about renegotiating the same opt-outs, you're looking for the UK to add more, which isn't going to be an easy task. So the UK could choose not to leave the EU, despite invoking Article 50 back in 2017, at least according to one of the document's authors. However, if the UK leaves, getting back in would be about as difficult as you'd expect. For more updates as they happen, on Brexit and politics in general, subscribe to TLDR News. Also, subscribe to our mailing list so that we can send you weekly updates and behind the scenes info, and make sure you don't miss out on anything.